Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. U.S. President Trump speaks with the leaders of Ukraine and Russia in separate phone calls to align the countries in a ceasefire agreement. Plus, Ukrainian POWs are returned as part of one of the largest prisoner swaps with Russia. And former Liberal MP warns of what a Mark Carney-led future may hold for Canada.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Both the Chinese embassy and Ottawa confirmed that 4 Canadians were executed earlier this year. China insists it had solid evidence leading to its execution of the Canadian citizens. A Chinese embassy statement highlighted Beijing's zero-tolerance drug crime policy, but did not explicitly say the Canadians executed had been convicted of drug crimes. Global Affairs Canada says it strongly condemns China's use of the death penalty and had repeatedly called for clemency for the Canadians. U.S. President Donald Trump says he spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy for about an hour this morning, one day after he had a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump took to social media to say the call was to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their requests and needs as he looks to bring about a ceasefire between the two countries. While Putin reportedly agreed to not target energy infrastructure in Russia's ongoing war with Ukraine, he refused to back a full 30-day ceasefire. On Wednesday, the Russian president announced that his troops were routing Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. Meantime, Russia and Ukraine said they swapped 175 prisoners of war from each side Wednesday in one of the largest exchanges of POWs in the 3-year conflict. Canada's new Prime Minister will hold his debut First Minister's meeting at the end of the week. His office says Carney's top priorities will include defending Canadians in the face of unjustified trade actions by the U.S. and strengthening the economy. Carney has a meeting planned today with his Advisory Council on Canada-U.S. relations. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is responding to comments made about him by U.S. President Donald Trump during a Fox News interview. Trump was asked about a possible upcoming Canadian election during Tuesday night's interview and the fact that polls now suggest the Liberals are in the lead. He said he doesn't care who wins, but thinks it would be easier to deal with a Liberal, while referring to Poilievre as being a, quote, no friend of mine. Poilievre told a news conference in Sudbury, Ontario, Wednesday that Trump is right to think he would have an easier time dealing with a Liberal Prime Minister, before referring to himself as a strong leader and a tough negotiator.
Yesterday, the president said that having a Liberal Prime Minister would be easier for him to deal with, just as he threatened once again to make us the 51st state. And you know what? On that point, it's true. I'm a strong leader. I'm a tough guy to deal with. I'm firm in my convictions, and I'll always put Canada first. It's clear that President Trump wants the Liberals in power because they will keep this country weak. That's exactly the kind of weak, compromised, conflicted leadership that Donald Trump wants, and it's why he endorsed Mark Carney yesterday. What Canadians need, though, is a leader who's tough and firm and stands by his convictions, a leader who will make Canada strong, self-reliant, and stand on its own 2 feet, a leader who will put Canada first.
The Conservative leader also says his government would waste no time in getting the green light for federal Ring of Fire permits, along with approval for the building of roads to get to the northwestern Ontario site. The area north of Thunder Bay contains critical minerals like nickel, copper, platinum, and cobalt that are potentially worth tens of billions of dollars.
That's why I'm announcing today that my government will set a deadline of 6 months to green light permits for the Ring of Fire. We will unleash the production of chromite, cobalt, copper, nickel, platinum, and others. We will also commit $1 billion over 3 years to help the Ontario government build the highway to get there. And because NATO has identified many of these critical minerals as necessary for our common security, we can count some of the expenditure on the road towards our NATO 2% target for defense.
Poilievre says his government would allow companies investing in the Ring of Fire project to share their federal corporate tax with local First Nations communities. The federal government has announced their intention to continue support for the revised Green Line LRT project in Calgary. In a statement, Alberta Minister for Transportation and Economic Corridors, Devin Dreeshen, said the provincial government is pleased that the federal government has approved the City of Calgary's revised business case for the LRT project, which has suffered through long delays and cost overrun concerns. Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek says she learned about the project from the province's own news release and adds that she wishes the city would have gotten more direct correspondence. She also disputed timelines on developments of the project. The line will stretch from downtown to the district of Shepherd, with the designing of the set to be finished by 2026. The new Green Line will receive $1.53 billion from the federal government, which will cost a total amount of over $6 billion. Well, Airbnb released an article on Tuesday that says that domestic stays across Canada have increased 20% since the beginning of the year. The site also lists a number of domestic destinations that Canadians have reportedly been traveling to the most. And one of these places is right here in Lethbridge. Lethbridge joins a list of 11 trending communities that include Quebec City, Yellowknife, and Campbell River, BC. Tourism Lethbridge says that alongside canceled travel plans to the U.S., there is an expectation that more travelers in Canada will be curious about the sights and sounds of southern Alberta.
I think that Airbnb type of accommodations are getting a little bit more popular, especially for people that are traveling with their families, with their pets. We know that that makes it a little bit easier for them to travel in those longer term stays. And I think we're really lucky in our region. In the short term, I do know a lot of people that maybe did have trips booked to the United States and chose to stay a little bit more local instead. And this is a great opportunity for Canadians to explore what they have here and get to learn a little bit more about the culture and the land that they are residing in.
The Airbnb article mentions that over the last yearly quarter, short-time rentals for couples have increased by 40%, while single bookings are up by 30%. Stats Canada released their newly updated population statistics, and trends show that growth has slowed considerably. Canada's overall population increased slightly by 63,000 or 0.2% to just above 41,500,000 residents. Almost half of those additions made their way to Alberta, which saw an increase of almost 30,000 people, or by 0.6% to over 4.8 million. In other provinces, BC virtually did not see an increase or decrease in population. Saskatchewan and Manitoba each saw a 0.3% increase, and Ontario and Quebec both saw marginal increase rates of 0.1%. However, combined, they took in a third of new residents in the country. The Atlantic part of Canada, in Atlantic Canada, most provinces saw insignificant decreases, with the exception of New Brunswick that saw a 0.2% rise. As for the territories, Yukon and Nunavut obtained a 0.4% increase, while the Northwest Territories saw a 0.3% increase. Stats Canada says the decrease in non-permanent residents is in part responsible for the slow population growth. Well, a group of students from Chinook High School contributed to the fight against hunger by, of all things, building a friendly yellow structure made of cans of food. Our BCN's Heidi Echevarria has the story of Construction.
The structure that we came up with was SpongeBob SquarePants, the cartoon character, along with his friend Gary the Snail and Plankton. And with other cans that were donated, we did our best to create an oceanscape that would represent their home of Bikini Bottom.
Creativity of talent took over the Center Village Mall. Various structures made from cans of tuna, beans, mushroom, and coffee, among others, demonstrated that in Lethbridge, talent transforms food into work of art.
When we got to build day, it really was a culmination of a lot of hard work and effort.
Joining cans and shaping them until they achieved the desired result. Although they knew the challenge ahead, they desired to give it their all.
When we started meeting, it was kind of like unsure, but as the date kept coming up and we kept meeting more, I think we really developed a really nice, firm plan, and then that translated into a really fast and fun build process.
I don't have much relation to architecture or engineering, but it was like a cool insight into something.
Shows people what you can do with cans, but then also none of the food is wasted, and it goes to like a really good cause.
Everyone go vote for our SpongeBob and Gary at Center Village Mall.
We've been telling all our friends, so
to go vote for us.
Yeah.
So.
In a statement, Daryl Chuck, board chaired with the construction event, said the construction board conducted its judging on March 12. All winners will be announced on April 3rd. Public voting will close on April 2nd. The construction board will tally all the votes and determine the People's Choice Award winner, who will join the other winners selected by the judges. For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echavarria.
Looks like so much fun. I love SpongeBob. Well, it is wonderful to see how members of our community are recognized for their significant contribution to society. And during a ceremony hosted by YMCA, awards and scholarships were presented, including the King Charles III Coronation Medal, the YMCA of Lethbridge Community Engagement Scholarship, and the RBC Future Launch Scholarship for Black Youth. Christina Larkin, YMCA Director of Community Development, shared more about the ceremony.
Our King Charles Medal winners today are people who have really gone above and beyond in their roles, which is one of the criteria. We put on the extra criteria of them being young people because we really want to highlight here at the YMCA of Lethbridge, the young people make a huge difference in their city and in their country. First, we have Wisdom, who is a volunteer here at the YMCA, and as an international student, he has gone above and beyond, juggling the many, many things that international students and newcomers to our community. And second, we have Paige, who is just a multifaceted, fantastic person here in Lethbridge. She's currently away as part of the 3-on-3 basketball team representing Team Canada.
It means a lot to be honored with this medal. I really appreciate everyone who noticed the work I've been doing so far. The work I've done so far in itself has been much more rewarding, be it parents complimenting me and everything, and I really, really appreciate that from parents as well.
The King Charles III Coronation Medal was introduced in early 2024 to commemorate His Majesty's coronation on May the 6th of 2023. Well, after a week-long trip to the International Space Station turned into a 9-month stay, 2 NASA astronauts have finally touched down, or splashed down rather, on Earth. Yesterday at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore came back to the Earth's surface for the first time since they launched into space last June. SpaceX Dawn pilot Colonel Scott Poteet shared his thoughts on our partner station, Dr. Phil's Merit TV.
It's an austere environment to be in space. You know, I've only spent 5 days in space, and it was pretty tough because of the impact that zero gravity has on the body. But it's such a celebration now that they're home and reunited with their families that made such a huge sacrifice. And we're just all so elated to watch and witness this history being made.
So amazing. And as it turns out, our own University of Lethbridge has a connection to NASA, as they have studied the effects of a changing environment on astronauts who go into outer space. Dr. Gerlinda Metz is a neuroscientist at ULeth, and we've had her on our show before to discuss how stress factors can impact the body. And while I can't think of a more stressful or even hostile environment than outer space, Dr. Metz joins me now. Dr. Metz, thank you for being here. Are you able to, in a nutshell, explain what the negative impacts could be of going into outer space for as long as Sunny and Butch did this past year?
There are many issues to spend that long out there. They're socially isolated, they have vibration, they have noise, they are confined, they are disconnected from their friends and family. And of course, they experience what everyone first thinks about, which is microgravity and also radiation of space. And so these are significant health concerns. Aging goes much more rapidly than on Earth. So you have all these stressors. You also have the lack of exposure to a gravity environment, which shifts the fluid inside your body. It actually shifts fluid into your head, and you end up having more liquid in your face and in your head than you usually have. It changes the cardiovascular system, so how your heart works. It changes muscle activity and bone density. Among pretty much any other organ, the brain, the kidneys, digestion, everything is affected by staying in space. And what I've seen in the reports is that especially Sunita Williams experienced some more significant bone loss than what was expected, and it was very urgent to try to get her back to Earth into a gravity environment and out of the radiation and so on.
That's just crazy and fascinating. Dr. Metz, what about long-term effects? Now that they're back here on Earth, are their bodies going to be in shock from re-entering Earth's atmosphere, where they'll have to almost go through a decompression time frame almost?
Yeah, kind of, really. It's actually like you're saying. So they're actually going into a long-term rehab program. These astronauts have to slowly start learning to use their muscles. Along with that, they have to also make sure they're taking proper measures to build their bone strength back up if they can, because spaceflight is like an accelerated aging process. You go through aging like 10 times faster than what you see on Earth, and this will take quite a while probably to rebuild the strength to be able to walk properly and keep the body upright. So we have more liquid, more water in the eyes. The pressure of the eyes increases, and that can actually lead to damage in the retina and vision loss. And then we have changes in the brain too. Cognitive impairments. There were even a few studies suggesting that there would be higher risk of Alzheimer's disease, and they are exposed to higher levels of radiation consistently while they are on the ISS. And so cancer would be a concern.
Oh, that is a concern. Amazing stuff there. Dr. Metz, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. That was Dr. Gerlinda Metz of the University of Lethbridge, a neuroscientist who has done studies for NASA about the effects of space on the human body. I think I will keep my feet firmly planted right here on the ground on Earth, a much less hostile environment. And speaking of the environment, we will be right back with a look at the weather forecast. Welcome back, and now here's a look at our 7-day and national forecast.
Today's forecast has today with a high of 9 and a low of 0 with nice sunny skies. Tomorrow is going to have a chance of showers with a high of 10 and a low of -1. Friday is looking to have sunny skies with a high of 12 and a low of 1. The weekend is going to have partly cloudy skies with Saturday having a high of 8 and a low of -4. And Sunday having a high of 10 and a low of 8. Monday is going to have a nice high for the day with a high of 18 and a low of 3. And finishing off the 7-day forecast with Tuesday, we have partly cloudy skies with a high of 13 and an estimated low of 0. Looking at today's almanac, the average high for this time of year was 7, and the average low is -6. The record high set back in this time of year is back in 1911 with 22, and the record low was in 1913 with -28. The sun rose at 7:37 today and set at 7:43. Moving on to the national forecast, Victoria and Vancouver are going to be having a chance of showers, with Vancouver having a high of 9 and Victoria a high of 10. Edmonton is going to be having some partly cloudy skies with a high of 2, and Calgary is going to be sunny with a high of 9. Onto the prairies now. Saskatoon, Regina, and Winnipeg are all going to share some nice partly cloudy skies, with Saskatoon having a high of -1, Regina 0, and Winnipeg a high of 5. Central Canada is looking to get a chance of showers all across, with Toronto getting a high of 13, Ottawa 17, and Montreal a high of only 14. Onto the East Coast, Fredericton and Halifax are going to be having nice partly cloudy skies, with Fredericton a high of 9 and Halifax a high of 8. Charlottetown is going to have sunny skies with a high of 10, and St. John's is going to be cooler than the rest with a high of 2 and partly cloudy skies.
A new survey has found roughly half of domestic manufacturers suggest they can weather a trade war with the U.S., provided the tariff battle doesn't go on for too long. The poll by KPMG in Canada says 54% of manufacturers believe they will be able to withstand a tariff war with the U.S. that lasts more than 1 year. The report says 86% of Canadian manufacturing leaders say it is time for Canada to start relying less on the U.S. The report was based on a survey of 602 Canadian business leaders in February. A new analysis suggests Canadians will see some relief at the gas pumps when the consumer carbon price lowers next month to 0%, but they may not notice as much of a difference in other prices for a while. As of April 1st, Prime Minister Mark Carney is pausing the consumer carbon levy in the 8 provinces and 2 territories that use the federal system. Desjardins says that will shave almost 18 cents from the cost of a liter of gas, and natural gas bills will fall almost 13%. The consumer carbon rebates that offset the cost of the carbon price will also end after the April 15th payments. Hudson's Bay Company is looking to get permission to begin liquidating all of its stores due to financial troubles. Ontario's Superior Court has decided to continue to hear motions related to the beleaguered department store that filed for creditor protection earlier in the month. Hudson's Bay continues to search for financing to keep the company alive, but the existing $23 million already sourced so far is not enough, and the business requires a full liquidation. Landlords, suppliers, and other businesses that appeared at the hearing have complained there isn't enough time to consider other avenues to help the business. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 363 points on the day to finish at 25,069. The Dow was up 383 points to 41,964. The S&P 500 was up 60 points to 5,675, and the Nasdaq was up 346 points to 17,750. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 31 cents to $67.21 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 15 cents to $4.21 US. Gold was up $15.42 to $3,047.11 US an ounce. Silver was down 15 cents to $33.79 US an ounce. Feed wheat is $8.60 per bushel. Barley is at $6.64. Canola is at $13.25, and corn is at $7.95 per bushel. Live cattle April contract was up $1.45 to $206.82. Feeder cattle was up $1.85 to $286.82, and lean hogs was down $2.02 to $85.57 for the April contract. And the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours, sitting at $69.80 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, both the Chinese embassy in Ottawa confirmed that 4 Canadians were executed earlier this year. China insists it has solid evidence leading to its execution of the Canadian citizens. A Chinese embassy statement highlighted Beijing's zero-tolerance drug crime policy, but did not explicitly say the Canadians executed had been convicted of drug crimes. Global Affairs Canada says it strongly condemns China's use of the death penalty and had repeatedly called for clemency for those Canadians. Coming up, the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, gives us the latest details on education support workers' strikes coming to an end, backlash against Premier Danielle Smith for a planned appearance with Ben Shapiro, and much more. Also still to come, an interview with Dan McTeague, who is a former Liberal MP. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can check out our website or our YouTube page anytime to see more of our interviews and stories. An election is likely only days away, so it looks like Premier Danielle Smith will get what she's calling for, which is an electoral test for the government formed by Mark Carney. But what might this mean for Alberta if the Liberals win? Well, to discuss this more is the Alberta legislative correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, welcome back. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, so Tyler, if the Liberals do win, what could this mean for the province? Could we see some more or at least different Alberta cabinet ministers? What do you think?
Well, it's really hard to say. The Liberals are growing in the polls generally across Canada. There's been some polls in the last couple of days that have shown the Liberals actually pulling ahead of the Conservatives. That is not the case in Alberta, which I don't think will be any surprise to anybody who's followed Alberta politics for the past 60 years probably. The Conservatives, I think, are sitting at about 55% support in Alberta, and the Liberals at about 30-ish% in Alberta. That's actually an improvement for the Liberals in Alberta over more recent polling. So the Liberals are doing better in Alberta than they were. They're still, totally swamped by support for the Conservatives. What that really means in terms of representation is, is there enough support in sort of any 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 ridings where a Liberal candidate could win? For example, right now, Calgary Skyview has a Liberal MP, and Edmonton Centre has a Liberal MP, and then there's 2 ridings in Edmonton that have New Democrat MPs. So, are those sort of trends going to be sustained? I mean, maybe. Maybe not. Of course, Randy Boissonneau is the Edmonton Centre candidate, and he's faced a lot of controversy recently, so it's hard to say if he'll win. And then George Chahal, the fellow in Calgary Skyview, that riding's actually changing around. And there's a good chance that Chahal is going to run in a new riding called Calgary McKnight. The reason for that is because Alberta's population is growing, and it's grown a lot. And every 10 years, the census figures are used to redistrict our ridings. And so Alberta in the 2021 election had 34 members of parliament. In this election, it's actually going to be 37. So there's going to be 3 more MPs going to Ottawa from Alberta. That just changes the political calculations a little bit in some of these ridings, because some populations have been hived off into new ridings, some populations are being added into old ridings. So it's a really complicated picture at the moment that you don't really get at from those high level sort of public polling figures, right? Because that's sort of province-wide. But then what you're really looking at is, in some cases, only a few hundred votes in these specific ridings that are determining who wins that election. So very hard to see. Certainly, if the Conservatives win the election, they're going to have, probably at least 30, 34 members of parliament to pick from for cabinet. If the Liberals end up winning the election, they'll maybe have 1 or 2, maybe 3. I mean, it's been about 50 years since the Liberals have elected more than 4 candidates in Alberta.
Wow. And then the provincial government has lately been blamed for funding for educational support to staff, as we have lately been seeing thousands of workers in Edmonton, Calgary, Fort McMurray, and elsewhere walk off the job earlier this year, and they've been on the picket lines. But this massive educational support staff strike looks like it's slowly drawing to a close. So, Tyler, this is a relief for parents, obviously.
It certainly is. You know, my friends who are parents have been talking about this a lot. It's been thousands of people. They've been off the job for, in some cases, a couple months, I think. And obviously, you know, middle of the school year, that causes a bit of strain on the school system. And so the Canadian Union of Public Employees represents most of these workers. You know, these are admins, assistants, custodians, educational support of sort of all kinds here, and they're represented by CUPE and in the negotiations with the school boards. You know, the Catholic School Board and the Secular School Board as well. The province is not like, you know, sort of directly involved, but they're going to be involved because, of course, they give the money to school boards to manage and things like that. So, and there's, you know, been accusations that they've been meddling in negotiations and that sort of thing. So this is, you know, even though this is a very local political issue, it of course reflects back on the province, and that is sort of the province's where they're getting caught up in it, so to speak. But it does seem like it's slowly coming to an end. I think Fort McMurray was the first to sign deals, both the Catholic School Board and the Secular School Board, followed by Edmonton. Calgary, I believe they're maybe back on the job by Friday, depending on how some of these negotiations go. Because, of course, they get an agreement and then it needs to be ratified by the union and so on. So always a little bit of space for things to go wrong at sort of the 11th hour in these things. But it does look like things are sort of calming down, coming to a close, and folks will be back on the job in most of these areas that are striking.
Yeah, it'll be great to see them back in the classroom for sure. Tyler, Premier Danielle Smith dealing with a controversy over her decision to travel to an event in Florida to appear with Ben Shapiro, the right-wing podcaster down there in the U.S. So I guess he's had a long list of controversies attached to him. So Tyler, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so the event is there's a group in the United States called PragerU, which is sort of a conservative sort of educational institution. You know, they write books for kids based on conservative values and sort of stuff like that. And so it's a gala celebrating PragerU, and Ben Shapiro and Danielle Smith are going to be appearing together as sort of guests or speakers, what have you, at this gala. And so the controversy is sort of twofold. I mean, the first is that she's appearing with Ben Shapiro, who is, a super controversial guy, even in the United States. And the other part of it is that she's traveling on the taxpayer dime to this event. And so, Smith sort of moves in right-wing circles in the United States. I mean, I think that's been no surprise over the last few months. We've seen her at Mar-a-Lago with Kevin O'Leary and Jordan Peterson and stuff like that. So, that part of it's not unusual. But it is controversial. Like, obviously she can argue that this is boosting Alberta's prominence in the United States and things like that. But it's going to be controversial here at home. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people who disagree rather strongly with President Donald Trump and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. So that's part of the controversy. And they're also sort of saying, well, why are you going to this event with Ben Shapiro? Donald Trump's not going to be there. None of the people necessarily need to be talking to her are going to be there. But she's saying that, no, look, this is another opportunity to talk about tariffs. This is another opportunity to talk about trade between the United States and Canada and oil and gas, and maybe it'll catch the ear of people in power. So that's sort of the debate that's going on. She's obviously having to defend herself. The NDP is obviously attacking her on it, and that's just sort of the way of the world. But not the first sort of controversy. I mean, she was criticized for going to Mar-a-Lago a couple months ago too. So it's more the same to some extent.
Yeah, exactly. Tyler, the province just announced some joint funding with the feds to get the long-awaited Green Line running in Calgary, or built. I guess this was just announced Tuesday, but it took the Calgary mayor and council by surprise, and they seem a bit upset at the province about this. Why?
Yeah,
Can you tell us anything?
Yeah, I mean, they've been upset with the province for a while. The province sort of came in last summer and said, look, this plan is a disaster. And sort of started walking out on the deal that had been signed and all that sort of thing. So there's been these negotiations going around over funding and also the route of the LRT. And the route is what has been of particular trouble to council. They don't necessarily want an elevated route. The province has sort of drawn up its own plans, this, that, and the other thing. So what it seems like we have now is the provincial government and the federal government sort of agreeing to put money behind this plan that was developed. And that isn't necessarily the plan that City Council loves. And so that's why they seem to be sort of taken by surprise. They see the planning as the plan we're going ahead with as being sort of a troublesome plan that has all these other problems. But there's money behind it now. So it is the latest in a very long-running saga. at least part of the controversy here has to do with the fact that the original Green Line document was inked when Naheed Nenshi was mayor. He's, of course, now the leader of the New Democrats here. So there's the political angle to it as well. They're trying to pin the problems of the Green Line on Nenshi, while also trying to get this project built for Calgarians. So super confusing. I don't know if anyone is, particularly thrilled about the way all of this is going down.
Oh, well, we'll see, I guess. Tyler, the Alberta Energy Regulator commissioned a study to look at our natural gas, and it turns out Alberta has way more than we thought. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so the sort of initial estimate, or the earlier estimate of how much natural gas we had, was about 24 trillion cubic feet, I think is the number. And now we figure it's about 130 trillion cubic feet. That's actually still a lot less than British Columbia, which has closer to 600 trillion cubic feet. But it is, obviously about a six-fold increase for what Alberta estimates its reserves to be at. And so you can imagine the implications of that. Do we have more natural gas operations? Do we export more natural gas? Do we sell more natural gas? Where is it going to be in demand? Perhaps the United States, as some of their sort of wells begin to run dry, possibly moving over to Asia and Africa to displace some other forms of energy. So that's sort of the high level look at it. The remaining question, I think, is how much of that natural gas is accessible, and how much of that natural gas is accessible at a reasonable price point. And that's a little bit what happens with these sort of things. If the price of natural gas is extremely high, then all of a sudden you have a market case for getting at difficult to access natural gas. If the price of natural gas is very, very low, then why would you spend, massive amounts of money on getting this stuff out of the ground? So it's a bit of a catch-22, right? You could have this huge supply, but if you can't get at it at a reasonable cost, how much good does it do you? So I think those are some of the questions that are going to be sort of looked at in the future is, we have all this. To what extent is it, financially and economically, is it economical to get it out of the ground and try and sell it?
Yeah, and speaking of which, Alberta has an orphan well problem caused by oil companies not cleaning up after themselves. And a draft report obtained by the Canadian Press suggested setting up government-owned corporations using money from industry, but backstopped by tax dollars. But this isn't a popular idea with Energy Minister Brian Jean. So what does Premier Smith have to say about all this?
Yeah, so Premier Smith has said, look, we have a report coming. It'll be released next month. It's going to give us a range of options on how to deal with these orphan wells. The draft report, one of the recommendations it makes is to sort of put public money in some fashion towards the cleanup of orphan wells. This has, as you said, always been really, really controversial. I mean, oil companies are obligated to clean up after themselves. Part of the orphan well problem, though, is that some of them were created, drilled, left behind before these rules came into place. You can imagine 30, 40 years ago, environmental concerns were a lot lower on the list of priorities. And so there's been talk over the years of there being some sort of public money put towards it, and it has never been particularly popular. What Brian Jean has said is, no, we are not going to be putting public money towards this. So he's come out quite firmly and said that. And so they're going to be held to that, I think, over the next little while. But we'll have to wait till next month to know exactly what the report's recommendations are and exactly what the government's response is. But certainly they're getting out ahead of it a little bit by saying, no, we're not going to be doing this.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so Danielle Smith's office, they're getting a $4.8 million budget increase. So where is this increase coming from, Tyler?
Yeah, they say it's coming from the energy minister's office primarily because Smith has sort of taken over some of these, let's say marketing and sales portion of the energy minister's job. But, the event with Ben Shapiro we just alluded to, the trips down to various industry conferences in the United States, things like that. So that is where they say this money's coming from. And they also say that it'll be used to sort of fold in the Canadian Energy Centre, which people may remember as Jason Kenney's energy war room. They're sort of folding that into government as well. So that seems to be what's sort of going on with that. Of course, people are going to see legislators giving themselves raises and more money for their offices and get a little bit outraged about it, which is fair game in politics. But they do say it's mostly just money being shuffled around from other departments.
All right. Well, the province has reported cases of measles, and some are in favor of using vaccines as a way to deal with it. The opposition being very critical also about this. Health Minister Adriana LaGrange, she's waffled a tiny bit on whether parents should vaccinate their kids. What are her concerns, Tyler?
Well, yeah, the NDP has tried to make a big deal out of this, saying that LaGrange is not being clear enough on measles vaccines. She did come out this week and say she absolutely supports parents vaccinating their children against measles. Very preventable illness. I mean, you and I are certainly of the generation when we remember everyone walking down to the school gym in grade 2 or 3, whatever it was, to get our measles vaccines. And the outbreak is not massive. It's, a handful of people up north and then a few people in Calgary and Edmonton. The problem is measles is incredibly contagious, and you need, I think the number that health experts put on it is about 95% vaccination rates to sort of prevent the spread of it around the population, and the number of people with measles vaccinations has been declining over time. So we have this outbreak, and obviously this is poking at some old wounds from the COVID years about vaccines and vaccine hesitancy and skepticism about vaccines. So it's not, a colossal crisis just yet, but certainly a frightening thing for people with young kids. And the health minister is sort of trying to navigate this a bit by explaining what the government's response has been, the healthcare response, and also trying to encourage people to get their vaccines because, at the end of the day, that's the best way for parents to keep their kids safe from measles.
Yeah. Alberta legislative correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining me today. Great to have you on.
Always a pleasure.
Affordable energy is something many of us are concerned about these days, and it just so happens that we have the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy joining us today. Dan McTeague served as a Liberal MP for over 18 years in Ontario, and some of you might use apps like Gas Wizard to check out local gas prices. Well, that is part of McTeague's company as well. Dan McTeague, thanks so much for joining me today. Great to have you with us.
Good to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first off, can you maybe give us a quick little snapshot of what your organization is all about?
Well, it has a lot to do, obviously, with gas price prediction, but to talk more policy about energy prices that have, prices have alarmed a lot of people in this country. Most people who drive are concerned that a country like Canada, blessed with an abundance of resources, most notably our energy, fossil fuels, whether that be natural gas, propane, oil, jet fuel, gasoline, finds itself paying extraordinarily high prices for fuel, which in turn, pardon the pun, fuels inflation. And the higher the cost of energy isn't just proportionally, impacting the bottom line for most consumers and most families. It's also, of course, increasing the price of everything else. And so, over 30 years in parliamentary work, energy sector, automotive sector, we put all this together to try to provide some policy insights or response that has not really always been very clear from those who simply take what the government has to say or actors have to say and accept it for what it is. We try to provide it and contextualize it and give people the other side of the equation. And usually, over time, we tend not to be too far from what actually happens. We were correct on the EV mandates, correct on the carbon taxes. They were very damaging. And we're also, of course, looking after the bigger issue, which is Canada's imposing on itself net zero. That's a lot of the focus here at affordableenergy.ca. A lot of followers, but a lot of people open for debate and know that there's always more than one side to a story.
For sure, definitely. Okay, so Dan, now that we have a new prime minister, just switching gears for a second here, can we just backtrack a little bit and chat briefly about the leadership race itself? Do you have any concerns about the manner in which it was conducted?
Well, I joined the Liberal Party in 1974, active since 1978 in a real way, ran a number of campaigns, became a member of Parliament in 93, sworn in as a Privy Councillor, cabinet status by 2003, stayed until 2011. The Liberal Party has changed. It's a very different organization than that which I had come to and served for 40 years, and the Liberal Party that preceded me, which of course was all about creating opportunities for people and creating, ideas of social accountability as opposed to socialism. The Liberal Party has taken a far left leap, and in the process left a lot of traditional Liberals scratching their head saying, is this really about diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social governance? Is it about post-national state? I mean, this may very well serve a particular constituency in this country, but it's not where the Liberal Party has been, which has always been at the center of where Canadians find themselves. And increasingly, the party has tried to lead itself into a far left corner, which I think is really alienating it from the base, no matter who the leader is. And of course, with Mark Carney not being elected, ever being in politics, never been subject to the acid test of public approval. Now governing the country as prime minister, it seems a little bizarre for a country that prides itself on its parliamentary democracy, a democracy and parliamentary system that really hasn't functioned since last September.
Okay, so what do you think could and should be done to swing that Liberal Party pendulum more back to a centrist party?
Well, fiscal responsibility, I think, would be the first one. We demonstrated that in the 1990s when the country was hitting the financial brink, and I think that's where we are today. We had a $20 billion deficit back in those days, or approaching that amount. Today, it's 62 billion, and that doesn't include what provinces may have incurred as well. That debt or deficit to GDP is pretty substantial, and if you think about 62 billion in an economy that's less than $2 trillion, it's now making up roughly about 12% of our GDP, which is very scary. Of course, we have $1.4 trillion debt overall. Those numbers may be eye-watering for some and perhaps sobering for others, and certainly put in context with where the Americans are. It may not be as great, but it does mean that a country that sees a significant decline in its economic outlook, its so-called GDP, productivity, labor GDP has dropped dramatically to the lowest levels in the OECD. It does paint a very, gloomy picture for the future of the country. And of course, we have a nation that hasn't, and a party that hasn't recognized that its most valuable assets are, in fact, its resources and getting them to market, something this particular brand of the Liberal Party has completely shut down and denied and turned its back on, and believe that you could somehow wave a magic wand and change the weather and have all sorts of policies surrounding the deconstruction of very things that make us tick as a nation. It's also one of the main reasons why I think Canadians are very alarmed that their standard of living, the cost of living is rising, their standard of living is dropping precipitously. That's where the Liberal Party has to go. That's where the public is at. And it's time for real action as opposed to, ideas and thoughts that are really, more aspirational than they are based on reality.
Looking back to Friday, March 14th, their new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, being sworn in. And on day one, what did he do? He stopped the consumer carbon tax. Can he actually do this on his own, though, or does this need to be voted in Parliament?
I had some experience in passing legislation in my time, including some of my own private members' bills. But look, unless we're talking criminal code, laws are really the blueprint, the permission that Parliament gives to a particular set of laws. Within those laws, the framework that makes up those laws, has to follow the legislation. So the legislation is still there. The regulations as to how to tweak it, how to put it together, how to flush it out is what has been amended here very temporarily. He hasn't said this is going to be permanent. He said he's going to pause it. It just means that the same old, deadly, pernicious, costly carbon tax is going to be there. And one of the suggestions that he's made is, I will go after the consumer carbon tax so that people actually don't see it. It disappeared during the period of the campaign in the hopes that you and I vote for them, only to have it restored, not necessarily as a carbon tax for consumers, but as an industrial business carbon tax. In other words, impose the burden on business, who will then promptly put it right back on our shoulders. For the Liberals, and for the NDP, it's a great scheme because then they can blame the oil companies for their price rise. But folks like me who have no affinity to the oil industry have taken them on will be very quickly point out that if people vote for Mark Carney and his friends in the NDP, they're basically voting themselves a restoration of those very damaging, very costly policies. And make no mistake, as I've heard the leader of the Conservative Party, who I'm not a member of, I've never contributed to, saying he's going to get rid of them. If Canadians want a stark choice in the next campaign, it's the guys who brought you pain, that's the Liberal and NDP, Greens, or the guys who are promising to get rid of it. And I sense that where most Canadians are is that it's not a necessary tax. It's based on CO2. I could never think of a more frivolous means by which we would want to tax anyone, much less make a couple of green grifters very happy and rich.
Yeah, well, and according to the guy who says he wants to get rid of it, so Pierre Poilievre says that this carbon tax legislation is still in place and it hasn't been revoked. So the government could put it back in place again if they feel that
Absolutely.
it's warranted?
And they will.
Okay.
And they will. Look, I can tell you, it's a shell game. Pardon the pun. They're going to take it off so that you vote for them, and the moment you vote for them, they'll do what they did last time. In 2019, they said no, we wouldn't let carbon taxes go above $80. $80, which is where it is now, $80 a ton. It's going to 170 because they broke their commitment. They said that they would let this thing go even higher. Could even go even higher. But reality is that Mr. Carney doesn't want to give people transparency in what he's doing. He wants to hide it, and he wants to force businesses to absorb it. We'll then proceed to promptly pass it on. Second thing, you pay 2 carbon taxes. And a lot of people don't know this. So it's 17.61 cents a litre plus GST. So in the province of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, that means it's about 19.85 cents a litre. That's going up 4 cents a litre on April 1st without the pause. But if the government, the Liberals are restored to power, they'll make that go to 37 cents a litre plus GST. Not only that, it'll be buried and you won't be able to see it. It'll be buried in the industrial tax, the industrial carbon tax, which you don't see, but which you and I are currently paying about 4 cents a litre for. That's eventually going to go to 20 cents a litre by 2030. So if you think you have a hard time affording things now with this artificial rise in the prices of energy, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I really hope Canadians are prepared to have the wool pulled over their eyes on this.
Oh, that's scary. So what it sounds like Carney is promising right now is that to raise the taxes for industrial emitters so that this will put money back into our pockets, or will the industrial carbon tax end up being passed on to the consumers?
Yeah, it'll go back on to consumers, and currently you get a bit of a rebate. You won't even get that. So maybe there'll be some tweaking, some adjustments. But, you know, Mr. Carney's made it very clear he likes the carbon tax. He likes what it's done. It may not have been seen as palatable, which is why they're going to take it away and blind consumers to actually what they're paying so that they don't see what it actually is and bury it as they currently do in what some call the clean fuel standard. That was the second carbon tax we lamented in 2021. The federal government came out with, some really interesting ideas as to what this would do. They never did a proper cost-benefit analysis. We found, through our help with Professor Ross McKittrick, Guelph University economist, that for every $1 of advantage the second carbon tax had of benefit, it actually cost consumers $6. So at the end of the day, they don't really care. It's not about what you think. It's about what they think. They know what's best, and they believe that CO2, the inert gas, being emitted from Canada, is somehow going to change the weather around the world. That's fanciful thinking, and it's the kind of nonsense that's got this country in the position that's in. My credibility on this issue is that I would have said the same thing to my Liberal caucus had they decided to propose this 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I was an MP. It wouldn't have flown then because it was a very different Liberal Party. This party is not, as I said, suggested, the same pragmatic Liberal Party that I was once part of. It's very much a cult that believes in certain international narratives that are extraordinarily, diminishing to Canada and very damaging to the country. No other energy producing nation would dare do something like this to itself. Why the hell is Canada doing this? Because we believe that Mr. Carney, who's the one responsible for diverting pipelines away from Canada, getting his company to move to the United States, taking claims of all sorts of things that he didn't do, including saving the country, balancing the debt in 1998 to saving the country in the global economic crisis. Same man who is being looked at in the United States for his GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, for constraining finances for oil and gas sectors. They're now looking at a potential major antitrust suit against him. It's one of the reasons the banks have simply walked away from this nonsense. I'm very concerned about this man. I'm concerned about the impact he's going to have on Canadians. They should not be deceived, if at all, for anything.
So what would you change about it then if you could, Dan? If you could change the party, the leader, any of it?
I would make it based on sound policies, pragmatism. I would look for consensus. I would look to ensure that, as what we did, we tried to make sure that what was good for Ontario and Quebec and the Atlantic Canada was also good for Western Canada and British Columbia. I wouldn't have taken policies that would be naturally divisive. We saw that back in the 1980s with Pierre Trudeau. We did the same thing under Justin Trudeau. every leader in between those two has attempted to try to provide a national platform on which they could at least get some kind of, in various corners, some consensus on. We tried very hard, not just sort of imposition with a very tiny, fragile minority, hanging by a thread over several years, to impose things on people that they cannot afford, and for which is pitting one region against the other, pitting family against family, ideology against ideology, and at the end of the day saying Canada has no national identity, it's the post-national state. I think the country has had enough of interlopers with their own, exotic ideas as to what this country is, and not focused on what makes this country tick, not just for our generation, but for generations to come. And my caution is also to an older generation, the so-called gray rinse, like folks like me. You are in no position to destroy a country and do things selfishly for yourself that is going to harm the next generation or generations to come. We've put this country in a financial straitjacket because of our whimsical thinking about things like climate and all sorts of other nonsense. At the end of the day, we have to get back to reality. And reality tells us, get your books balanced, and make sure that you do something productive that invites the unity and the consensus of most Canadians, not the way we've seen over the past few years, which has been divide and conquer and lessening the country as I see it.
Yeah. I thought budgets balance themselves there, Dan, don't they?
You know what? We joked about that. Justin was a bit of a goof, and I've said this before, but this Mark Carney is no fool. But he has a lot of people who are willing to be duped, and I'm not one of them. And I've said right from the outset, this is the man behind the levers of the government over the past 5 years. If you like what's happened in Canada the past 5 years, okay, I understand that. But if you know there's a problem, then you must vote accordingly and make sure these people are not returned to power anytime soon. And by the way, this election isn't about, orange-haired man bad. This is about Canadians losing their national identity and other nations, not just the United States, but China, realizing just how vulnerable we've made ourselves by making some really, really awful political choices. It's time for Canadians collectively, I say this to my friends here in Ontario, smarten up.
That's about the time that we have there today, Dan. I'm so sorry. Didn't get to all my questions here, but thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Great to be here, Jeanette. Thanks.
Dan McTeague is the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.